Starting, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the weekend educational series. Today, Dr. Ann Budzak will discuss substance abusing parents and their children. Dr. Budzak is a general pediatrician whose practice focuses on child maltreatment and infants born to parents with substance abuse disorder at Gundersen Health System. The handouts area includes a PDF of today's slides, as well as a PDF with details on the following housekeeping items. To ask a question, you can use the question pane on the control panel. Questions will be addressed at scheduled breaks. To obtain continuing education credits for today's session, you must track your attendance by texting today's code to the phone number on the screen. The code and phone number will be displayed at the end of today's session. After reporting your attendance, you should log into your account at ocpe.mcw.edu and complete an evaluation within 10 days. To view step-by-step instructions on claiming continuing education credits and to see a list of future webinar topics, please visit wichildabusenetwork.org/webinars. Now we will proceed with today's presentation.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Ann Budzak. As Elizabeth said, I practice at Gundersen Health System in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And we're going to talk today about parents with substance use disorder and their children. I have no relevant disclosures to share with you. And I'm hoping by the end of the hour that you will feel confident to be able to list at least 3 safety risks that children living in a drug-endangered environment experience. Be able to identify some common behavioral characteristics of a child who lives with a parent with substance use disorder, and be able to identify the key to working effectively with parents who have substance use disorder. I think we're all well aware that our country has really faced a rapidly growing problem with drugs of abuse. The most recent statistics come from 2017, and we have almost 20 million Americans age 12 and above who battle substance use disorder. A significant number also struggle with alcohol use in addition to drug use, and a large portion have comorbidities of mental health disorder in addition to their substance use disorder. Wisconsin is no different than any other state in the country. We at home here have seen a rapid rise in the number of people dying of opioid-related deaths, and this graph just breaks down the different types of opioids, whether it's synthetic, heroin, or prescription. We've tried to significantly change the opioid prescribing practices of the physicians in our country, and we are making headway there, but unfortunately the opioid related deaths continue. We also have a huge problem here in Wisconsin with methamphetamine use, and there are some areas of our state that see this with more prevalence than others, my own community being one where this is often the most common drug of choice. We'll focus a lot on meth and opioid today, but that doesn't mean that cocaine, ecstasy, THC aren't also present in our children's lives here in Wisconsin. If you're curious about whether your state, or excuse me, your county in our state is one that's seeing a rapid rise in meth cases, this is a map with the darkest blue being the counties that saw the most dramatic increase in meth cases between 2011-13 and 2014-15. The ones that don't show increase doesn't mean meth isn't there. This is related more to the rapid rise in use. And of course, As a result of our drug issues, we are seeing how this affects our unborn babies and our newly born. In Wisconsin, we have seen a steady rise in neonatal abstinence syndrome as a result of infants being exposed prenatally to opioids or opioid medication-assisted therapy. This is a really expensive problem, and it's certainly affecting the cost of health care in our state as well as across the country. Our focus today really is how this affects children, because it does. If a child is living in an environment where an adult is using, it will have an impact on the child. And mainly because parenting and drugs don't mix. It is impossible to be an effective parent while actively using opiates, methamphetamine, or the other drugs I mentioned. Because this impacts parenting so negatively, we've seen a huge surge in the need for foster care and out-of-home placement. In fact, it now has significantly overwhelmed our foster care system in the last 5 years. There are lots of reasons why kids are poorly affected by their parents' drug abuse. The most significant problem is neglect. When parents are focusing on their drug use, they're not focusing on their kids. And when they are impaired, they really cannot meet their child's basic needs. They're not present for their child, even though they're physically there. They are not providing a healthy, nurturing, structured environment. They're not looking out for the safety concerns of raising a small child. There's very poor or no supervision whatsoever. And there's lots of dangerous things within this drug environment, from the paraphernalia, the weapons, and the types of people that come in and out of a drug home. What we see when we evaluate children that have been raised in these environments is a huge risk for developmental delay due to the neglect that these kids have experienced. With severe neglect over months of time in infancy, the result can look very similar to autism because the developing brain is really wired to proliferate in the pathways that are used over and over and not in the pathways that are not. So if a child is experiencing fight or flight 24/7 for weeks, months, or years at a time, some of the other pathways that are required for learning and normal development are just not utilized. So we often see kids that have significant language delays, motor delays, personal social skill delays, and they often are children that have very poor emotional regulation. So supervision is huge, and anyone who has spent time with a mobile infant or toddler or preschooler knows that they can get into trouble very quickly when nobody is paying close attention. And so lots of accidents happen as a result, from accidental ingestions to falls, burns, and other types of trauma. These kids are often left alone, whether that's home alone while parents go out partying, whether that's being left in the back seat of a car for hours while parents go into a bar, or whether these kids slip out of the house while their parent is passed out and are seen wandering down the middle of a street in the middle of the night, wearing only a diaper. When kids are not receiving the attention and care that they need, it really makes them very easy targets for other predators in the community. Kids are best at their best when they are receiving attention from an adult, and unfortunately some of the adults, ready, willing, and able, are not ones that we want giving that attention to our kids. When children are living in a drug using environment, they often miss a lot of school for a variety of reasons. That it may be just that no one gets up in the morning to make sure they get out the door and to school on time. Or it may be that they need to stay home and watch younger siblings, and that's the priority for the parent rather than making sure they get to school. Often their medical needs are not met. They frequently have not seen a doctor routinely for well child care. They haven't gotten immunizations in a timely fashion. And if they have underlying medical problems, those problems are not addressed. Follow-up visits are frequently missed, and they get lost and fall through the cracks. No one is making sure these kids brush their teeth. Often they are given bottles long beyond the first year of life, and they are drinking soda and juice out of a sippy or bottle 24/7. So dental neglect is a big problem with lots of rotting teeth and lack of dental care. Emotionally, these children are often put in a position of being the caretaker, whether that's for their own parent, who they see impaired and passed out regularly, or for younger siblings. And eventually, this becomes an intergenerational cycle of drug abuse, and kids grow up with all of their relatives, everybody they know is a user, from grandparents to aunts and uncles to cousins. I'm going to pause there and see if anyone has any questions.
No questions right now.
Okay. Well, let's talk about some of the common things we see in kids of different ages who have been living in a drug environment. We'll start with the pregnant woman and the risks that drug use poses during pregnancy. We have kind of a catch-22 when it comes to using opioids in pregnancy, because abruptly stopping is very risky to the unborn infant. It leads to preterm labor, fetal distress, or even fetal demise. But continuing use of opioids is also a problem and also causes risk to the unborn, from placental abruptions, fetal death, preterm labor, and meconium, secondary distress, passage in utero. There are birth defects are seen, and babies are born too little. It is felt that medication-assisted treatment during pregnancy with Suboxone or methadone is much more preferable than continuing to use either pills or heroin or synthetic opioids sporadically throughout pregnancy. With medication assistance, a controlled amount of opioid is going into the system, and hopefully there is abstinence from other drugs of abuse and encouragement to participate in both OB care as well as addressing the addiction through therapy. Whether babies are exposed to street opioids or prescription opioids or methadone or Suboxone, they may be born with neonatal abstinence syndrome as the levels of those drugs start decreasing and leaving their body. I've listed here for you the common symptoms that might be seen with a newborn with neonatal abstinence syndrome. The severity varies from baby to baby. Usually we start seeing these problems within the first 2 to 3 days of life, and they can last for several weeks to months, depending on the baby. Almost universally, they struggle to gain weight in the beginning. They often have tremors. They need to suck constantly. They are fussy, irritable, and difficult to soothe and console. Not all babies require medication treatment for their NAS. Those that do often are given morphine or methadone in the hospital. This prolongs, of course, the hospital stay. If their symptoms are not severe, they are able to go home after a 3 to 5 day stay for observation. That doesn't mean going home means they don't have any symptoms. These are very challenging babies to care for, and we are sending them home with parents that have less support and resources than average. These babies are overstimulated very easily. They don't do well with transitions. They cry a lot. They are hard to soothe. They spit up a lot. They may have diarrhea. They don't eat very well or easily. They may be disorganized in their breathing, sucking, and swallowing, and be hard to feed. They don't acclimate or habituate to a noisy environment or lights and things that newborns typically will acclimate to quickly. And for these reasons, entering daycare may be very hard for them because it is a stimulating environment with a lot of activity. Let's go on to toddlers. Toddlers who have lived in a drug-endangered environment have often been left with multiple people on a frequent basis. And so when you meet these kids, they often will go with anybody without hesitation, which is not typical toddler behavior. They usually are not good sleepers. They may have a very odd sleep schedule and have been used to staying up a lot of the night and then sleeping during the day. They may never have been put to bed in a crib or a bed. They may have just fallen asleep wherever they were in the home. They have not known a routine in their lives and have just sort of drifted through their days and nights. They may be on a bottle long after we typically recommend it be discontinued at 12 months. We see a lot of developmental delays, and they may not turn to an adult for comfort or help when they hurt themselves. When they may not even cry because no one's responded previously, and so it doesn't seem like a worthwhile activity. A toddler who has had an acute significant exposure to meth in the environment will initially appear very high energy, very wired, and bouncing off the walls essentially. They won't be able to sleep. They'll be irritable. They will probably not want to eat a whole lot. They may have some vomiting and diarrhea, and they often don't like to be touched. They don't want to be cuddled and soothed, even though they're clearly very irritable and upset and dysregulated. Then with time, they will crash, just as an adult user, and then they sleep and sleep and sleep. for up to a couple of days. They'll wake up briefly, they may be willing to eat or drink a little bit, they go back to sleep. Once that crash is ended, then they are often ready to eat a lot, and they are much less irritable and much less bouncy. Unfortunately, toddlers often are also exposed to opiates, intentionally or unintentionally. We have had in our practice parents who have intentionally injected their infant or toddler with an opiate, hoping to make them be easier to take care of or go to sleep. If you encounter a child with an acute opiate ingestion, they are irritable, they're pretty sleepy, and of course, this may be a very dangerous situation, causing some apnea, depression of breathing drive, vomiting, pinpoint pupils, and that can be pretty scary. Preschoolers who live in a drug environment also have some common behaviors and experiences. They too have a lot of sleep issues because they've not had a routine. Often scary things have happened in the night in their experience, and so they are reluctant to go to sleep unless there is some background noise and lights to make them feel more safe. They may not have ever seen all of the food groups before. They've often lived on Cheetos and other snack foods, and frequently they aren't potty trained even though they're 3 or 4 years old. They have often not been given some of the experiences that most children have had by this age. They may not have ever been given crayons and been shown what to do with them. They may have never eaten with silverware. They may have not had anyone prepare meals for them. And the way they've grown accustomed to getting adult attention is to scream when they need something. Sitting down to a table to eat a meal may be a very foreign concept to them, and they may have never brushed their teeth. They may have never been tucked into bed at night or read a story, and they may have never observed healthy relationships either between adults or between adults and children. Because of this, they have fended for themselves at a much earlier age than is typical or appropriate. So they may scale the cabinets in a kitchen and start looking for what they want to eat. They may be very challenged on regulating emotions and go from happy to completely flipped out in 2 seconds and have trouble calming themselves. They have often not had anybody giving them rules and then reinforcing them, and so they don't expect that anything said to them is actually going to be followed by consistency and expectations. They've been left alone a lot. They've been left with other people. Their parents may have dropped them off with someone they've never met before and not come back for 3 or 4 days or a week. And so if you tell them that you're going to be gone for a few minutes, they may not believe you because other people haven't been truthful with that in their past. And so they're often very frightened of being left alone. You may see some symptoms of hypervigilance and become jumpy and reactive to noises more so than other children. And often these kids are fairly aggressive with adults, with other kids, and towards themselves. School agers have often lived in a drug endangered environment for years by the time they are school age, and home insecurity is a very common recurrent problem. By school age, these kids may have moved so many times that they can't even tell you how often. I saw a 4-year-old for an abuse evaluation that had come from this environment, and she had moved 42 times already in her 4 years of life. Because of moving frequently, if they've been in school a few years, they may have gone to multiple different schools already. They have often been expected to parent their younger siblings and or their parent, and they're often very protective of their parent. They've learned what they should and shouldn't tell other people, and they see it as their role to take care of their parent and not let others interfere. They may have a significant fear of law enforcement because they've been told that those are people that will take you away or put their parents in jail. Because of food insecurity, they often hoard food when given the opportunity for food, and they often are still having lots of bathroom accidents day and night, even though they are now potty trained. They've had experiences unlike other kids because of living in this environment for some time. They know what being homeless is like and have often experienced it several times. They've witnessed domestic violence. They may have been present and witnessed their parent being either trafficked or engaging in prostitution. And they have a significant risk of having been sexually abused or physically abused in the past. These kids can tell you a lot about drugs, how to use them, how to prepare them, where to get them. They also often have quite a colorful vocabulary of foul language, which is how people talk in their world, and so they often don't realize that it's inappropriate. They've often been left to entertain themselves, and electronics or TV for hours at a time may be how they've spent much of their life. They too may have fears of nighttime and sleep and need background noise and lights in order to fall asleep. Because of moving frequently and missing school frequently, they often are behind academically and struggle with the school environment because it is highly structured, unlike the life they've lived at home. They haven't had as many opportunities to have healthy, normal peer relationships, and so getting along with other kids in school may be quite a challenge for them. And of course, a common emotion is anger and distrust for these kids. When we get to adolescence, we see that by this point, parental substance abuse has been their life story for years, and they've often been parenting their siblings for a long time, and they have seen a lot over their years. They've likely witnessed their parents or friends overdosing, attempting suicide, arrests, prostitution, DV. They've had recurrent food insecurity and been homeless. By this point, sexual abuse in their past is very common, as well as physical abuse and neglect. So polyvictimization is the norm. They may have been trafficked in exchange for parental drugs. They may or may not realize they've been trafficked. They may have been told various things about why they have relationships with adult men or women and don't realize that their parent has set them up for this in order for the parent to get supplied with the drugs they need. They may have been involved in the drug deals that their parents make, and in fact may have been expected to be the go-between to obtain the drugs. So their knowledge of drug life is extensive. They also are often expected to help support the family, and they are expected to turn over to the family any money they make, from a paper route to working in fast food restaurants, etc. And as I said, getting trafficked for parental drugs is not unusual. So their school experience is often challenged as well. They've not attended regularly, and school has not been something that's been prioritized in their family. They have seen a lot of people come and go in their lives, and so relationships are usually seen as temporary. They don't have a lot of faith in adults because adults let them down regularly. They see the world as everybody wanting something from them, and they've not really had a lot of opportunity for normal friendships or extracurricular activities. It's unusual to find a child that's been raised in this type of environment to have had the opportunity to be in sports after school, or Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, that sort of thing, because they've not been given that chance. They aren't going to be kids who have had music lessons and dance lessons and the things that many kids get to experience. So by this point, they can be rather difficult to get along with, because they really have developed a lot of defense mechanisms and don't see a reason to listen to other adults in their life. They may opt to just take off and leave if they don't like what's happening, whether that's in school or at home or in a foster placement. By this time, they too may be actively using drugs regularly. If you think about it, drug use is really the only way they've been taught in their life to deal with stress. It's what the adults in their lives always did. Frequently, they have become smokers of cigarettes. They may be used to getting the things they want by selling their bodies. They often have not done well in school and may drop out before finishing high school. And they will have brief, strong attachments to other kids of similar backgrounds as the norm. Let's pause there again and see if there are any questions.
We do have a couple questions.
Okay.
The first question is there any specific scoring or diagnosis for withdrawal from methamphetamine similar to opiates? We tend to see babies exhibiting issues with feeding, sleeping, tremoring a few days after birth when meth has been drug of choice.
There isn't any published scoring system that I'm aware of. And I think that surrounds the fact that there really isn't medication that helps infants withdrawing from meth that's been studied or tried. I agree with you that a lot of the symptoms look very much the same. But no, I'm not aware of anybody using a scoring system for meth withdrawal.
Okay, next question is, are there any specific delays more prevalent in toddlers that have been drug exposed?
I think that the biggest challenge we see in evaluating drug exposed toddlers from prenatal exposure on their development is trying to separate out what's related to the drug exposure and what's related to the environment in which they're being raised. In the program that I run here at Gunderson for infants born to substance using parents, we do have some in the program that have been raised in foster care since birth and have not had much contact with their biological parents. And surprisingly, those kids still have more frequent developmental delays than you would see in the general population. The two areas that seem to be most frequently affected early on are gross motor delays and then language delays. Now we're hoping to be able to have a prospective long-term study here at Gunderson, being able to demonstrate what that looks like long-term. Our oldest kids in our program are currently 3, and we've been evaluating development carefully ever since birth. So I hope to have an even better answer for that in the years to come.
Great. And one more question. When children have not been tucked in or brushed their teeth, does that also result in sensory issues?
That's a really interesting question, and I would have to say that it varies from child to child, but having never brushed your teeth may or may not result in a sensory problem as far as toothbrushing goes. I think in general, kids who have been neglected are at increased risk for sensory problems.
Great, and that's all we have right now.
Okay, well, let's go on to what we can do. Child abuse prevention optimally happens before abuse has ever occurred. But when it has already occurred and our goal is reunification and helping parents to be successful at parenting, we want to prevent any further abuse. So, of course, we need to know which families are at risk, ideally before abuse occurs. We want to know within these families what their individual stressors are. We want to be able to provide them with education on parenting and child development and how to interact in a nurturing way and play with their child. And we want to be able to provide support specifically to address the stressors that the family is facing. So we approach this by always trying to remember that addiction is a disease, and it is not a disease that any of these parents would have chosen looking back on it. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, gee, I hope I'll be a heroin addict someday. And they really want to be good parents, and they wish that they could be better at it. I can't stress enough the importance of the parents getting a handle on their addiction and becoming healthy in order to be a successful parent. They really have to focus on themselves before they can focus on their children when they are deep in their addiction. Unfortunately, by the time that we begin working with them, they've often burnt a lot of bridges in their past with their whatever support system they may have had in the beginning because of their abuse of drugs. And they are very, very wary of the judgment that they expect you are going to be imposing on them. And so they enter a relationship with you very distrusting and looking for confirmation that you are judging them. Addiction's been a long-term coping strategy that's worked in the past. Often people are self-medicating for their untreated mental health issues. Often they have grown up with addiction being how others in the family have coped before them. And as you get to know parents with addiction, you learn that they often have an extensive trauma history themselves. So they are very fearful that they are going to lose their children, and they often begin believing that everyone is out to take them away. They already feel judged by everybody, and they are also judging themselves harshly. When I work with the level of guilt they feel for any issues that that new baby has related to their addiction is overwhelming, and they are very hard on themselves. They also haven't had a lot of support and encouragement in the past, and they aren't used to it. And so that takes some adjustment on their part. It's expected that there are going to be setbacks. With any disease, we have periods where patients are successful in managing their disease and times when they're not so successful. And addiction is no different. The families with addiction that I've worked with typically have a lot of needs when it comes to basic resources. Housing is huge, a huge problem. And if they've had convictions in the past for drug charges, then unfortunately they also have had felonies, and that will eliminate some of their opportunities for public housing. They don't qualify because of their criminal history. Transportation is often a challenge. Food insecurity is very common. And so these basic needs really have to be addressed. Before you can help anyone who has substance use disorder raising kids, you've got to build a relationship. That is the key to success. You will not be able to work with these families without first developing a relationship. It, in my experience, takes several visits to earn the parents' trust. If you are working with them in a medical setting, they need to be seen frequently at first in order to get to know them and slowly start to work on the issues that the family has. Without that relationship, you can provide all the education in the world, and it's not going to be received or implemented if you don't have that trusting relationship first. And what does a good working relationship look like? Well, above all else, be respectful and non-judgmental. It's important to be positive and to be genuine and to be supportive. It's important to communicate effectively and thoughtfully and try to help build this parent's self-esteem and sense of control over their lives. It doesn't mean that you're going to overlook serious problems. You're not, but you need to address them with tact and in a respectful manner. Here at Gunderson, we've created a team approach to work with families with substance use disorder. We do this work right in the general pediatric clinic, and the team consists of a primary care physician assigned to the family, our clinic pediatric social worker. We have 3 pediatric RNs in the program. We have a child psychologist here in our office. She's our integrated behavioral health therapist. We have a pediatric OT, and then we welcome community workers who may be involved with the family, whether that's a healthy families worker, a parent coach, a community social worker, CPS workers. They are all invited and welcome to our appointments with our families. There's lots of medical issues to address, from the NAS symptoms of the newborns and struggles with growth to developmental delays at all ages, immunization deficiencies, and past medical needs that have not been met prior to when we begin working with them. We try to address basic needs right from the get-go, and we check in with every visit as to how these things are going for our families. Parents really have to be in agreement to receive treatment for their substance use disorder in order to make any progress. If they are in denial and are actively using and not addressing the challenges through therapy, it's not going to go anywhere. For the kids and parents, enlisting the help of a home parenting coach is very helpful, as is getting therapy set up individually for the children as well. There are some ways to leverage parents being in treatment. Obviously, the external pressure is CPS, with the bottom line being keeping their kids or getting them back. Because ultimately, if they continue to actively use, they continue to not be functional parents, and their children continue to be at serious risk of harm. And that isn't acceptable. That neglect is the most common form of child abuse we see. And we want to support parents, we want to help them be good parents, and we believe they can be, but they have to be willing to address their substance use disorder in order for that to happen. So the better the relationship you have with the parents, the more likely you'll succeed. We don't set them up for failure. We don't tell them we expect them to be perfect, but we do expect them to be honest. And when they have a relapse or they have a slide in a backward direction, we encourage them to be upfront about that so we can problem solve, have safety plans for what we would do next time and what we need to do now. If they can form a healthy relationship with a therapist that they like, that definitely plays a huge role in them staying with treatment. They need a lot of help with basics that we often don't address in general pediatrics with most of our other patients. They have often no idea how to create structure in their day. And my nurses will often actually break this down into hour by hour. How are they going to spend a day from getting up in the morning until going to bed at night? They haven't led a child-oriented life before, so this is a very new concept for many of our parents. They often need a lot of help with the actual environment. They may need help with actual cleanup. There's often safety issues that have not been addressed in their home. Safe sleep is something frequently not being adhered to with infants, so we talk about that every single visit. And try to problem solve with parents when there seem to be barriers to compliance. We talk about who comes in and out of their home and whether those are people that should be around their children. We talk about how to decide if somebody is a safe caregiver to leave their child with. And we talk about the impact of the romantic relationships in their lives on their children and what is healthy for their children and what isn't. And of course, domestic violence and the importance of how that impacts their child's lives is something we talk about as well. Finances are a huge struggle, and the ability to get and hold a job is clearly linked to longer sobriety and stability. So if we can help parents to get job training or to get a job and keep a job, that really helps the big picture. It helps them with maintaining a routine. It really improves their self-esteem, and it gives them an opportunity to meet people outside of their former drug life for social contacts. They often feel very socially isolated. They don't know anybody who wasn't a user. And so they need to really create a new support system for themselves. We can help by hooking them up with parenting groups or religious services, the library. Here in La Crosse, we have YMCA scholarships for families in need, and so those are all opportunities that we can help direct families in different directions away from their old drug culture. They need a lot of help with parenting and often don't realize the full impact that their addiction has had on their children. The parents themselves may have experienced attachment disorder in childhood, and this frequently leads to an adult with borderline personality disorder. Now we have the next generation, and their child may have attachment disorder. Hopefully we can prevent that from happening if we start working with them during the newborn period, but often that opportunity is passed and we now deal with the fallout of that. They don't have a good understanding of normal child development and often will see normal child behaviors as a personal attack on them. I've had a parent tell me that she knew her 4-month-old cried just to quote unquote piss her off. Or I've had parents with their newborns crying say she cries because she doesn't like me. And so we have to talk a lot about each stage of development and what their child is capable of doing and what they aren't capable of doing, and what different normal child behaviors mean and what they don't mean. These kids are challenging. If they have been growing up in a drug environment for months to years, they are going to be harder kids to take care of than the average child. They have trouble regulating their emotions. They may be in the habit of some very negative behaviors as the only way they get adult attention. And the typical approaches to discipline are corporal punishment, screaming at kids, and using foul language. So we have a lot of work to do to teach more appropriate discipline and model appropriate parenting for them. They frequently have not come into parenting with a lot of positive parenting roles in their life. The kids also need help directly. If we can get young kids into structured out-of-home care, that is very helpful. My dream is to someday be able to have early Head Start in lacrosse, which means Head Start starting at 6 weeks of age instead of 3 years of age. Respite care is very helpful as well for these families. If we can get school agers into after school activities, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, or YMCA activities, that too is very helpful. So in closing today, I just want to summarize that building a trusting relationship is really the key to success. And we have seen many very rewarding examples of phenomenal successes in our program. Folks who may have permanently lost custody of previous children, who now for 3 years are successfully parenting and doing a beautiful job of it and staying sober. We reiterate over and over to families that stability and permanency are the goals, and that all of this work is in order to be able to raise a healthy, thriving child. We try to be very non-judgmental and respectful of our families. And above all else, we are honest with them. We know that addiction is a disease and we expect relapses, and we anticipate them and plan for them with families. We plan for setbacks, but we keep moving forward. And I found it to be one of the most rewarding experiences in my practice lifetime. I feel very lucky to work with the 133 families that we've had in our program. And I learn new things every day because of it. More questions?
No questions.
No? Okay, well, I've got a couple of pages of references if anyone is interested in reading more. One of the references is my own publication on our Gundar Kids program for parents with substance use disorder, if you're curious about the details of that. And I will leave you with the slide for attendance and credits.
Thank you, Dr. Budzak. I'll ask you to leave this on the screen for just a couple of minutes. Attendees, if you have not already done so, you may now text the attendance code and complete your evaluation. Thank you for being with us today.